welcome, croeso to this evening's webinar. Law-based, but not entirely exclusively to do with legal content. So I'm about to share screen with you, and then I'll once I've got that up and ready, I will introduce myself, tell you a little bit about who I am. Bear with me a second. There we go, seamless, wasn't it? Right. Okay, so I hope you can all see me and hear me okay, and also see the relevant slides as we go through. So as Samantha said, I'm Cerys Davies. I'm one of the law lecturers here at the Hilary Rodham Clinton School of Law at Swansea University. In my capacity as lecturer, I teach tort law, which, unless you've done any law already or studied any, you're unlikely to have heard of. But criminal law I also teach, and that definitely is something you will have heard of and perhaps be interested in. But as I've said, this isn't a law session as such on either of those topics. But obviously, if anybody does have any law-related questions, then at the end of the session, I'm very happy to answer those that I can. And obviously, if there's anything that I can't answer, we'll make sure we get back to you. So this evening's session is not subject specific, but its aims are twofold. We're going to look at a topic of ongoing controversy, but we're also going to use that topic to engage thinking skills, skills of analysis, skills of evaluation, of critical thinking. Why? Because that is one area where we as university lecturers, as academics, it's a skill that we value. And one of those skills that really makes a difference to the quality of an undergraduate's work. I'm guessing that you will all want to enter further education, and presumably I have a cross-section of students here hoping to follow different disciplines maybe, so not law but other disciplines. And although I'm currently a law lecturer, before that I was a solicitor by trade, before that a police officer. So obviously I do have a particular perspective when I'm considering the value of skills. But regardless of my own background and my own discipline, the understanding that being able to marshal your arguments, to analyze them, to evaluate them, and to see an argument in its broader context is really important. It'll be important in your academic life and studies, but it goes beyond that. As students who are ambitious and who have aspirations to be perhaps the leaders, the decision makers of the future, the ability to look beyond the immediate, to acknowledge wider implications of something is crucial. And that ability is not one that we're necessarily born with. In fact, instinctively, our individual views or perspectives on something are often derived from our own self-interest. What is good for me in the here and now? Good leaders, good decision makers have learnt not to deny their own instinctive views, but to acknowledge those, and to acknowledge that before making any big decision, they need to pause and consider an issue in its broader context and look for those implications of that decision that might not be apparent at first glance. And you'll forgive me if I come back to the world of university study for a moment, but I have many students who, following an assessment, ask why this piece of work or this essay was not in the higher mark band. And very often my response will be that whilst the work showed a good knowledge and understanding of the topic, perhaps, the essay didn't demonstrate a deeper understanding of the wider implications of a point of view or a particular argument. The student hadn't gone beyond their first thought or their first position. They hadn't really examined that or acknowledged a competing argument, or how their first instinct might have other consequences. So hopefully this exercise today will get you to practice a bit of broader evaluation, a bit of critical thinking. Now, all of that sounds a bit heavy, but don't worry, because I'm going to use someone who you'll all be familiar with to kick us off. Now, as I've said, the topic today is one that's topical, but I'm going back a little bit in time because hopefully some of you will remember what happened in the first week of January last year in the US. Outgoing President Donald Trump continued to maintain that it was he and not Biden that had actually won the presidential election. And he addressed a protest march of his supporters in Washington, D.C. Remember that what happened next, what followed, was the storming of the Capitol building. And very regrettably, the deaths of 5 individuals as a result of that storming. It's a very, very serious incident. Now, Trump's comments during that speech and online were very strong. And here, beg your pardon. Here is an example of something that he had said and obviously tweeted. Now, obviously, this was reported around the world and the incident itself was widely condemned. But what I want to use as a basis for our discussion today is the reaction of some social media platforms to Trump's comments. Now, we all know that how fond Donald Trump was of communicating via Twitter. But swiftly following the storming of Congress, this is what happened. Trump was banned. First of all, Twitter banned Donald Trump from engaging with tweets on that platform. And then he was also banned from Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and Snapchat. Now, the Twitter ban was permanent. And in June this year, Facebook and Instagram confirmed a further ban of 2 years on Trump and on his posting and his ability to engage and communicate via those platforms. So in the intervening period then, in the interim period, he remains either banned or suspended and unable to use those social media platforms. He is effectively deplatformed. Now, just to get a sense of what you think at this early stage, it would be great if you could pop into chat a yes/no answer to the following question. So either put a Y for yes or an N for no. Let's keep it simple. The question is this: do you think that Twitter, Facebook, Instagram were right to ban Trump? So if you have a view, feel free to share it via chat, please. I'll give you everyone a couple of seconds to do so. And I'll try and scroll and see. This is just to give me an indication of the audience's views at the outset. So I think just in scrolling through, the general consensus is that, yes, you consider these social media platforms were right to ban him, ban Trump. Now, that view might have been shared by many people. Some were in complete agreement with the fact that that Trump was banned from these platforms, deplatformed. But others including but not limited to Trump supporters, were up in arms. There was considerable reference to Trump being deprived of his rights. So the first thing worth doing this evening is just to try and be clear on what rights mean in this context. Now, some of you may well have a good understanding of rights, but we do need to be precise. We need to distinguish between the use of the word right in our day-to-day language and enforceable rights. So we may often refer to having a right to something. I hear it from my kids all the time, you know, about what they have a right to do. I've got a right to have my time on the Xbox. You don't have a right to tell me what to do or where to go. But what we're focusing on when we talk about rights in this context are enforceable rights. Those rights that we consider should be protected and guarded and enforced under the law. And primarily those that are derived from the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, this isn't a human rights session today, but the discussion I want you to have does rely on you having some understanding of whether there is a right or rights involved here and what those are. So, a quick question. I hope you can see it. My tab seems to be obscuring the question, so I'll read it out anyway. Which, if any, of the following European Convention on Human Rights rights may be relevant here? While you're thinking about that, I'll read them out and highlight them. There's no need to put anything in chat unless you want to. Feel free to engage if you do. But certainly do decide in your own minds which of these rights you think might be relevant. So first of all, we've got the right to private and family life, which is Article 8 of the Convention. The right to freedom of thought, which is Article 9. The right to a fair trial. The right to freedom of expression. And the right to freedom from discrimination. Now, the answer is that all of these rights, and maybe more, are relevant to this issue of potentially banning individuals from social media platforms. The obvious one that we might recognise as being clearly potentially impacted is the right to freedom of expression, Article 10. The right to say what you think, what you feel about something, but also the right to private and family life. That right includes your right to participate in society. And if you consider that access to social media is key to that participation, then any ban impacts on that. It was only a couple of evenings ago, wasn't it, where Facebook and Instagram were temporarily out of commission for whatever reason. You might want to think about how that impacted you, if it did, how deprived you felt of your immediacy in terms of communicating with whoever. But that was a short-lived problem. Consider how it might impact on your ability to be part of the society in which you live if you could no longer access those social media platforms. Also here, we've got right to a fair trial. Well, why might that be relevant? Well, if social media is used against you, then that might adversely affect public perception. What is said in the media can prejudice an outcome and can call into question whether any subsequent legal proceedings are fair. So if an individual is banned from a platform, but someone else makes an adverse comment about them to which they cannot respond, might that subsequently impact on your right to a fair hearing or a fair trial? Right to freedom of thought, freedom of beliefs. Well, that also includes the right to manifest, to practice, to display those thoughts and those beliefs. So again, in a world where much of that goes on via social media platforms, if you're deprived from that, might there be an element to which you could say you're being deprived of this true freedom to express your thoughts and your beliefs? And finally, the right to to freedom from discrimination. And that includes discrimination on the basis of gender, race, age, but also, crucially, on the grounds of political or other opinion. So is there a potential argument that in deplatforming someone or banning them, that may be feeding into depriving them of this right to be free from being discriminated against on the grounds of some opinion that they hold? But if you recall, the starting point of today's discussion is going to be, we'll go back to and use Trump and his social media bans in particular. So the first task, if you like, today is going to take the form of asking you to take a position on something, and then in a minute, hopefully, to contribute some thoughts that I can put on the next slide. So this is our fictional situation. It's 2 years' time. Remember, I said that Facebook and Instagram have extended the Trump ban for a further 2 years. So let's assume we are now in 2 years' time in 2023. You've been asked to present to the board of directors of Facebook your argument as to why either Trump should be permanently banned from Facebook, or your argument why Trump should not be banned from Facebook. Now, you can choose which perspective you're going to adopt here. The only thing I ask is that you choose one to begin with. Just stick with one and think of arguments for that particular view. Now, you may not personally hold the view that you're choosing to engage with. And there are good reasons why you might not, especially for anybody interested in a career in law eventually. As a lawyer, your duty is to represent your client. And sometimes you'll agree with your client's perspective, and sometimes you won't. But either way, you're going to have to argue your client's case, regardless of your own particular viewpoint. So before you decide which group you are going to be a part of or elect to be a part of, consider what your instinct may be drawing you towards, and maybe you challenge that by going for the other group. But whichever it is, have a little think about, select whether you're going to argue for group A or group B. And once you've had a chance to do that, and when I stop talking, I'll give you a minute so you can marshal your thoughts and perhaps contribute something into chat. I'm hoping we'll have a few arguments on each side. If this was interactive, you could be shouting out now, we could be going into breakout rooms. But you'll kind of have to think about it on your own and then contribute into chat, please. It would be helpful if you're A, before you post your comment, you just put the letter A, and then you don't have to worry about how beautifully you express yourself. But what kinds of arguments might someone arguing about to permanently ban Trump, what arguments might they put forward? What arguments might Group B put forward? So I will mute myself for a minute or two and then have a look at chat and see what you're coming up with. Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds. Thank you for those that have contributed already. I'm making a note of some of these so that I can type them in on the next slide or share them with everyone. Okay, well, look, thank you for those contributions already. They're very valuable, and rather than perhaps waste time in my typing in on the next slide, we'll kind of skip that, and I will just deal with some of these comments already posted in chat, arguments on both sides. So first of all, we had a comment about public safety. So risks that an offensive comment, and there was another comment about inciting violence. The risks that if you permit, and we'll stick with Trump at the moment before we widen our outlook, that being able to post insightful comments, offensive comments, stirring things up, is a greater risk to society. It can pose a greater risk to society. And indeed, arguably, it did on that evening in the storming of Congress. A number of people went back to, well, Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, well, they have the right to do that. That's part of your engagement with the social media platforms, is you understand they have the right to ban people. And so that would be a strong argument as to why he should be permanently banned. What I would say on that is the fact that Facebook have the right potentially to ban, there needs to be a bit more of a persuasive argument as to why they should. So just because they have the right to do something, why should they in this case? But we also had some interesting comments from B groups, or people who adopted the B position. And a number of those centered around the basic fundamental freedom of expression right. So he has, just as we all do, a right to freedom of expression, to say what you think. And it would be wrong to deprive him of that right. So I'll come out of my view of chat, and we will skip the next slide. So rather than waste your time while I type up those comments, all of those comments make a lot of sense. And those comments that you've posted reflect very much clear views that a person might have as towards the issue of banning or deplatforming Trump in this case. However, what we need to be careful of, whatever the initial perspective, the initial view, is that we do have an understanding of the wider implications of, on this topic, banning or deplatforming somebody. So for a moment, let's set Trump aside as an individual, and let's have a look at what might be some of the wider implications. So regardless of how one feels about Trump as an individual, what might be some of the wider implications? Well, in terms of banning or deplatforming someone, one of the consequences of doing so, regardless of the impact on that individual, might be Facebook itself. And if you're being asked to present to the board of directors, you need to have the organization's priorities in mind also. Might it be that Facebook would lose the respect, lose the trust of its users? Might it, if it bans a particular individual or organization, be seen to be holding a particular stance, or be Big Brother-like, or be policing users' attitudes on its social media platforms? And might that have a knock-on effect that Facebook as a platform loses the respect of its users? Might a ban be counterproductive? Those who have objectionable views might be able to capitalize on having been banned or having been deplatformed. And it can give more weight to their argument, to their position. It also can reduce the scope for correcting any fake news or challenging or disturbing views. So if the post, the tweet isn't there, does that actually strengthen the position, or does it weaken the position? Because, as I've said, you don't have any redress, you don't have the opportunity to argue against that position on that platform because the post no longer exists. And one of the issues that we often find, and I'll come back to that, is if users who have been banned or suspended or deplatformed entirely can't use a particular social media platform, where do they go? Do they disappear? Or do they, in fact, go elsewhere? And that elsewhere is a place where they're not being challenged, because it's a place where the only other people who visit that platform or visit that website are all of the same mindset. So they're just rehearsing the same views time and time again to the same audience, and nobody is challenging them. So might it be counterproductive, even when the tweet or the post is very offensive? Another thing to consider is, if it was decided to ban Trump permanently, for example, where do you draw the line? If you ban one individual, how far do you go? What about supporters of other more objectively worthy causes, but that put their views in an outspoken way? So maybe they're defending a position that most of us would agree with, but they're doing so in an aggressive way or using offensive language. Would you ban those individuals also? There are also the practicalities of banning or deplatforming anybody. You know, who decides whether a ban should be enforced? When? How? Would you operate a position of strict liability? By which I mean, what if somebody's account had been hacked or being used by someone else to post something offensive or discriminatory or aggressive or insightful to violence? Would you say, well, that person's account will just be banned? That's just tough. It wasn't them that posted it, but it came through their account. Or would you say, well, no, in that case, you'd have an appeal system? If so, who would hear that appeal? And how on earth would all of that be managed? I don't know if you're aware of how many Facebook users there are, for example, but I looked up the most recent figures, and apparently there are nearly 2 billion daily users. So in any one day, 2 billion people are using Facebook to post. That's a lot of people. how would you manage banning people from Facebook in a way that's fair and in a way that's consistent when you have so many users to deal with? And a final point here, and one that I've already mentioned in passing, is that one of the implications of banning or deplatforming can be to drive those people, that message, underground or onto new platforms where there are less or even no safeguards at all, so that the offensive message, the offensive posting, the dangerous posting isn't disappearing, it's just moving on elsewhere. So those are some of the wider implications of banning. What about the wider implications of not banning? So for those that adopted the Group B perspective, which is, well, no, actually, regardless of what Trump may or may not have said, he has the same right as everyone else to freedom of expression. So no, our argument would be that Facebook shouldn't ban him permanently. What might be the wider implications of that? Well, again, it's the same point, but from a different perspective. Might not banning, might permitting those posts, those tweets to continue, also have the impact of Facebook, in this case, losing the trust and confidence of users. Might users consider that they want to share in a platform that doesn't promote violence, a platform where they feel safe? Is there a danger that a perception of Facebook might arise that they don't care who says what and to whom about whatever, and that it would make those that do have maybe a social conscience or don't feel comfortable in an environment where those posts exist to avoid that platform? And if they do, you're leaving that platform in the hands of those who are louder, the louder, more offensive voices, and not the tolerant, not the objective, and not those of us who are of the, I do have a view, but I can also accept that you do too. So might it have that impact if time and time again users are seeing comments, posts, messaging that they feel should not be there, but Facebook is not taking any action? And again, this is very topical because this is again in the news of the last couple of days about reports that Facebook apparently commissioned and then ignored, allegedly. Another point or implication of not taking action, not banning, might be the messaging that puts out in terms of, is that conduct acceptable? So does not banning risk giving out a message that that particular type of behavior is acceptable? And if it does that mean an escalation in that particular type of conduct? Might not banning an individual who posts something inflammatory lead to that conduct being seen as acceptable and lead to an escalation and then worse and worse statements or worse and worse promotions of violence? And there is a connection here with the next point, which is about desensitizing. Do users become desensitized over time? And is there a real danger that if you don't take action about offensive posts, that inaction leads to acceptance over time and a normalization of that kind of conduct and a lower threshold of what we consider to be unacceptable behavior? And I always think in this context about swearing. I'm old enough to be of an age where you didn't hear the F word on television, on radio when I was growing up. You wouldn't even hear it in a shop if you were out. If you passed a building site or a pub late at night, yes, you might well do. But the situations in which you would actually hear the F word were very limited indeed. And you would never use it in front of parents. I'd like you to think about how often you hear the F word now. And when you do hear it, in a film, on television, on the radio, do you gasp and step back in shock? Or does it not even register really with you anymore because you hear it so frequently? Now, I'm not making value judgments here, but that is an example, I think a good example of how over time we can become desensitized to things that initially we might find offensive. But if no action is taken, if nobody steps back in shock, if nobody gasps, if nobody says anything, does that become normalized, become commonplace? And finally, misleading information can be shared and promoted. Absolute protection of freedom of speech can have dire consequences. We all think that we can recognize truth. We all think that we can recognize what's correct. But actually, studies suggest otherwise. Studies suggest this is not the case. And here is just reference to one particular study. And again, it came out of the 2016 election, the lead up to that, the election campaign in the US. And studies were done based on social media platforms, what was being posted. And their findings are contained here in this, there's just an abstract, a summary of some of the findings. And of the known false news stories that appeared in the 3 months before the election, those favouring Trump were shared a total of 30 million times. So first of all, we are talking about false news stories. So these were proven to be false, okay? But those false stories were shared 30 million times on Facebook. And more crucially, just over half of those who remembered seeing those fake news stories believed them. So you can do your own maths and hopefully, however good or bad you are at maths, that's a lot of people who might have been influenced, would have believed something that was actually fake. So whilst we think we're very, very clever at weeding out the truth from the fiction, and from the fake, studies show otherwise. So that's another danger in permitting stories, posts, comments to be promoted, to be posted without any reaction to them by any social media platform. And you'll see here another group or organization, which again illustrates the point. I don't know how many of you are familiar or have heard about the organization called QAnon. Again, primarily they're a US-based, they are a US-based group or movement, probably we should call them. And you'll see here details of this particular report. There is a link in the slides should you want to have a look at it subsequently at the end of the series. But this is a story about, again, Facebook banning QAnon and the members of QAnon banning their accounts. Now, if you're not aware of who or what QAnon are, what they stand for, it's good to have a look and make sure that you do understand who we're talking about here. But in essence, they're a group of conspiracy theorists who have a number of theories about the world order, about particular politicians. Sometimes there's a religious angle to the views, but very much a conspiracy theory group. And as you can see here from this story, Facebook banned QAnon and the posts of those accounts that were clearly affiliated with them, as have Twitter. Now, that means tens of thousands of users having been banned as a result of their connections with QAnon. Why? Because they're considered harmful. Some of the positions taken by this group were deemed to be very, very harmful in terms of their messaging. However, here you will see another report which suggests that banning QAnon members from Facebook and Twitter hasn't made those views disappear. The members do still engage with each other and others, but they're using different internet sites. So not mainstream social media, but fringe sites, where their actions, plots, schemes, messages are more difficult to monitor and more difficult to see and therefore to call out, more difficult to correct. Another illustration of the two sides of this can be seen in connection with the site Twitch. One, I must admit, I've never used, but some of you may. So you will know far more about this site than I do. But I do know that recently there's been some serious concern about the ramping up and the increase in offensive messaging on Twitch and what are known as hate raids. Now, pressure has been put on Twitch to do something about these hate raids, to take more of a proactive role in preventing the hate raids and in shutting down those who are contributing to offensive, damaging, racist, sexist, or other hateful posts. However, again, you can see the potential impact that in shutting down people who were perhaps expressing an opinion, they might have actually been seeking to highlight other questionable conduct. So I'm not going to detail my understanding of this particular story, but this is just one in many examples of an individual who questioned something in a positive way, apparently, but who was also banned for having an opinion. And it's one of the many examples in which we might think initially we're clear on the course of action to be taken, or I will shut them down, remove them, shut them down. But then we might start thinking about the wider implications of that, both the ones that we foresee, but also ones that perhaps we weren't anticipating. So the question for each of you to think about is, what would you do? Now, never mind Trump. We've got endless recent examples much closer to home, where social media is being used to harass, to discriminate, to threaten, to deliberately cause the highest level of offence. Think back to the summer and the Euros and the reaction of some on social media to those penalty takers who missed. What was done there? What was done about that? Well, again, if you've been monitoring the news recently, you will know that very recently there's been stories in the press about one individual who was actually, police took action against was taken to court and was found guilty of a criminal offence and had a suspended jail sentence. Now, whether or not that person is now going to be banned permanently from social media, we don't know. But it is a difficult one, isn't it? That was one individual whose post was clearly bad enough that a criminal charge and a conviction could follow. But there are many, many, many more who won't meet that threshold, or against whom the police will not be able to take action due to a lack of evidence, or simply because there are too many of them. And it's a difficult one, isn't it? You'd like to think that we can overcome these situations maybe by combating the negative with positive messaging, by calling out this kind of behavior on social media. So not by banning people, but by taking more of a proactive role ourselves and calling it out, and posting positive responses to override the negative. Or by using campaigns and education to highlight why this behavior is so wrong, rather than banning individuals. So are campaigns, education, are they the way to go? Well, those shocking posts that followed the Euros and those penalties weren't the first time we'd seen this. Earlier this year, Marcus Rashford was in the news in January after receiving the same kind of abuse following his performance in a game against Arsenal, I guess. Now, that abuse, again, was just one in a long line of examples of where this happens. And the culmination of all those instances did lead to various sports joining together in imposing a social media blackout over one weekend. I don't know if you remember that. But that was before the Euros. So the fact that that was done, the fact that that stance was taken, did it have any impact at all on the abuse that was there after that was forthcoming for those footballers who took those penalties? You know, there are innumerous examples I could provide which indicate that whatever is currently being done at the moment is not having the effect we want it to have. So I'd like you to now just to think about whether, whatever your initial view was when I first posed that question in the context of Trump, as to whether we should be able to deplatform or ban or shut an individual down. I'd like you to think about what you think now. Now, it may be that your view has changed. Or it may be that your view has remained the same. But either way, hopefully, you can now see and appreciate arguments which might have highlighted some different perspectives, depending on what your initial view was, and understanding and appreciating those different perspectives, and that there are consequences, implications of a particular course of action that you do need to think about before you arrive at a final decision as to where you stand, and at least be able to acknowledge that your viewpoint might bring its own problems or its own consequences. Now, I've no doubt that all of you do use social media. I'm not making assumptions here. Some of you might not. But those that do, I'm sure will have come across posts that you consider unacceptable, unpleasant, offensive, or downright inflammatory. And And I'd like you, when you next come across something like that, to just pause and consider, what is my instinctive reaction to this? Do I think this individual or that group should be banned? And then have a further think as to, if they were, what might be the implications. It's very easy to say, well, we ban someone, we kick somebody off a platform. But in doing so, as I say, you need to be alert to the consequences of that. Okay, so I will ask a final question for contributions, if I may. And again, just a yes or no in chat to begin with, and then we'll take some Q&As. Have any of you changed your position? Because many of you, when we were talking in the context of Trump, said, yes, ban him. Having considered some of the arguments for and against, if you've changed your view, can you just put yes in chat, or Y for yes in chat? And if you haven't, whatever your viewpoint was, if you haven't changed it, can you put an N in? And I'm not taking a record of this, so feel free to be honest. And so far, I've almost got exclusively, no, I haven't changed my view. And that's perfectly fine. All I would ask is that you are at least acknowledging, whatever your viewpoint was, that there are valid arguments for the other side. And just a final slide, which again contains a useful article if you're interested in this topic and you just want to read something on it. Again, if you've got your phones with you, you could take a screenshot. That'll be quicker than perhaps waiting for the link. But this article does touch on some of the ideas on both sides of the argument, banning, deplatforming individuals. And I'll leave it up for the time being while we take any Q&As. So you can take a note of that article and Google it later. So shall we open up to questions? So I'll deal with, because there are a couple of law-related queries, so I'll just park those for a moment. And there was a question here, what stops them from making new accounts? And of course, that is another issue. There is nothing to stop somebody who is banned under a particular handle, a particular username, from adopting another persona or a different handle or a different username, and that's what a lot of people do if they are suspended. Will go, if they're determined to continue to post or to interact with that platform, is that they will set up a new account. And yes, again, if they're continuing to post that offensive material, they may be suspended or banned again under that new handle. But yeah, it is a case of Facebook chasing its own tail, potentially. Could they ever resolve this? Could they ever, no matter what they do, end up with a clean Facebook site where there are no untoward, offensive, discriminatory posts ever made? It's highly unlikely. And so is the price of endlessly trying to do that, when balanced against freedom of expression and all the other arguments in favor of not banning and not deplatforming, where does that balance lie? And yes, another good question. Do you think it should make a difference if the person has a large following? Well, again, what we can say about Trump, which is why he's an excellent example, is at the time, there would have been few people in the world who had a following as large as he did. And might it be an answer to say, well, people who Facebook feel have that enormous audience, and therefore, if there is harm done, can be done on a grand scale, should they be treated differently to individuals? You know, an individual troll sitting in their own house posting a discriminatory message, should they be treated differently? The issue, of course, is that whilst that individual might not have a large following, you don't need a large following to cause real harm, distress, or offence to that one other person that sees that post. But it's an interesting question. And undoubtedly, it's had perhaps a bearing on the fact that Trump has been banned, and banned more quickly than other individuals who remain nameless, who don't have a profile. Okay, well, shall I turn to some of the law related questions? So we've got a question about, and I'm assuming you do mean particularly at Swansea, is there a chance for pro bono work during the law course? Well, again, I hope, Samantha, you're happy for me to answer some of these.
Yes, of course, please do go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that we offer at Swansea at the law school is we do have a law clinic. Now, the law clinic provides extracurricular opportunities, if you like, for our students. And the law clinic provides a number of different projects or opportunities. And one of them is indeed to sit with solicitors and help them help real clients. It's pro bono in the sense of the clients that come for that service aren't paying. But in terms of our undergraduates offering pro bono legal advice, no, they wouldn't, because of course they're not qualified solicitors. However, the opportunity is there for those that are interested to see more of the practical side and to sit alongside a solicitor in that context. Now, a lot of our law clinic projects were had to be either curtailed last year because of the difficulties with face-to-face. But as we open up again, more of these opportunities will be coming on stream. But the short answer is yes, in terms of getting those additional skills experiences, we have a number of different extracurricular activities, like mooting, like negotiation competitions, like client interviewing. We have our legal skills course. We have miscarriages of justice projects that students can get involved in. So if you come to one of our open days, you'll be able to have far more detailed information about all of those extracurricular, so those that are on top of your studies, the opportunities we make available. So it's a good question to come along and ask when you come to one of our open days. And what law courses are there at Swansea Uni? Well, there are quite a few. And so what I would advise is that you have a look at go into our open day links. You will see there access, I think, to module handbooks. So there are a number of law courses. There's the LLB straight 3-year law program. We also offer law and criminology. We offer business law.
I do have another question for you, please, Cerys. I think you're probably best at answering this one. It is, as someone interested in criminal law, would you recommend studying law alone or a joint degree of law and criminology?
Okay, well, the answer is going to be a bit of a fudge, because it really is a case of having a look at both syllabuses and seeing what sparks your interest more. If you're thinking of a career in law subsequently, let's say as a solicitor, we make sure that obviously our law undergraduate, our LLB, meets all the requirements for a qualifying law degree. But equally, those that do law and criminology with us also study the same core modules that you have to study if you want or if you need a qualifying law degree for the purposes of becoming a solicitor. So in terms of if you decided that's what you wanted to do as a career, you would have covered what you need to, whether you do the LLB, straight law, or whether you do law and criminology. And some of our students who, like you maybe, look at the law and criminology syllabus and see things on the criminology side that they think that's really interesting. I really, really want to do that. Then that is something you could consider and not, if you like, disadvantage yourself further down the line. So it's a matter of doing your research. Go and ask those questions, have a good look at the syllabus. We do provide the detail of the various modules and a little bit about what those modules are. And of course, one of the ideal things is to talk to other students and to get a viewpoint from students on both of those courses. Hopefully you'd be able to do that during an open day, but also my understanding is that sometimes you can connect with these students and you'd be given details of maybe videos that they've put together for us about what they think of the courses or whatever it might be. But do your research enough to ask those questions when you come and see us about the particular details of a particular module if you've seen something that you're interested in.
Perfect, that's great. And yeah, I'd reiterate that. I think when you come to an open day, if you are undecided between different subjects, definitely do your research beforehand, and then you could always go to more than one subject on an open day. You just need to book the appropriate time slot for that. We definitely recommend that you say, speak to students on those courses and really get a feel for what actually is going on that course, and what you can actually do leading off after you finish your course and then leave Swansea University. Okay, great. So thank you all for staying with us this evening. It's really good to see that the amount of participants we started with, we've ended with, which is always great. So I hope you really did enjoy the session today.